Crowded bar near a college campus in Columbus, Ohio. Music playing, people laughing, drinks flowing. Security cameras captured dozens of people coming and going throughout the night. And among them is a 27-year-old medical student named Brian Shaffer. He walks into the bar just like everyone else. But here's the part that has haunted investigators for nearly 2 decades. Brian Shaffer was never seen leaving. Not by friends, not by staff, not by the dozens of security cameras covering the entrance. Somehow, in a crowded building full of people, Brian Shaffer simply vanished. This episode, we're diving into one of the strangest disappearances ever recorded. This is the story of the Brian Shaffer mystery. And by the end of this episode, you'll understand why investigators and armchair detectives alike have spent years asking the same question. How does someone walk into a building and never come back out? Before we go any farther, let me take a quick moment to thank one of the sponsors helping support the Pine Grove Briar. If you enjoy hunting, wildlife photography, airsoft, or just spending time outdoors, you need to check out Quick Camo. Quick Camo makes incredibly realistic 3D leafy camo suits, along with hats, masks, and gloves designed to break up your outline in the woods. These aren't just your standard camo patterns. The 3D leafy design actually mimics real vegetation so you blend into your surroundings. And right now you can get 25% off your order by using the promo code PGBPromo at checkout. Just go to quickcamo.com/discount/PGBPromo. Again, that's Quick Camo and the code is PGBPromo for 25% off. And just so you know, when you use my code, I do earn a small commission. If you decide to buy something, you're also helping support the Pine Grove Briar. Alright, let's get back to the story. To understand why Brian Shaffer's disappearance is so unsettling, we first need to understand who he was. Brian Randall Shaffer was born on February 25th, 1979. He grew up in Pickerington, Ohio, a suburb just outside of Columbus. Friends described him as charismatic, intelligent, and easygoing. The kind of guy who could strike up a conversation with just about anyone. Brian attended Ohio State University, where he was pursuing a medical degree. Becoming a doctor had been a long-time dream of his, and by 2006 he was deep into his medical training. He had a bright future ahead of him, but Brian's life had recently taken a painful turn. Only weeks before his disappearance, Brian's mother passed away after battling cancer. Her death had devastated him. Friends said he was grieving, but he was trying to push forward. Spring break was approaching, and Brian had made plans to take a trip to Miami with his girlfriend, Alexis Wagner. The trip was supposed to be a chance to get away, relax, and clear his mind. But before that trip could happen, Brian went out with friends for a night in Columbus. A completely ordinary night. A night that would turn into one of the most baffling mysteries in modern true crime. March 31st, 2006. And we're coming up on the 20th anniversary, by the way. It was a Friday night in Columbus, Ohio. Like most college towns, on a Friday night, the area around Ohio State University was alive with activity, and bars were filling up. Music blaring down the streets, students and locals were out enjoying the beginning of the weekend. Earlier that evening, Brian had supper with his dad. The two had a good relationship, and despite the recent loss of Brian's mother, they were trying to keep things moving forward. Life moving forward. Just trying for some sense of normalcy. After supper, Brian met up with a friend named William Clint Florence. The two decided to head out for drinks. Their destination was a popular campus bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloon. The bar is set on the second floor of a small entertainment complex called the South Campus Gateway. To reach it, customers had to ride an escalator up from the street level entrance, and that entrance was monitored by security cameras. Cameras that would later become the centerpiece of this whole mystery. Around 9 p.m., Brian and Clint arrived at the Ugly Tuna Saloon. The place was already busy, and college bars tend to be loud, energetic environments, and the Ugly Tuna was no different. Music blasted, people crowded around the bar, conversations overlapping with laughter and shouting, and Brian and Clint began drinking and socializing. At some point during the night, they ran into Meredith Reed, a friend of Brian's, and the three of them spent time talking and hanging out. Nothing seemed unusual about Brian's behavior. He appeared relaxed and friendly, just another guy out enjoying a night with friends. But as the night went on, something important happened outside that bar. Something that would later be captured on security cameras. At approximately 1:55 a.m., Brian Shaffer stepped outside the bar. He walked into the hallway near the escalators. Security cameras captured him standing there talking with two women. Those women were later identified and interviewed by police, of course. They said Brian appeared completely normal, just making casual conversation, laughing, talking. Nothing about their interaction seemed strange or unusual. After several minutes, the women left, and Brian turned back toward the bar. At 1:58 a.m., cameras captured Brian Shaffer walking back toward the entrance of the Ugly Tuna Saloon. That moment would be the last confirmed sighting of Brian Shaffer, because after that, Brian Shaffer was never seen again. When the bar closed about 2 a.m., patrons began leaving the building. People poured out through the escalator entrance. Security cameras recorded dozens of customers exiting the complex. Among them were Brian's friends, Clint Florence, Meredith Reed, and they waited outside for Brian, but Brian never came out. At first, they just assumed that he had simply left another way. Maybe he'd gone home with someone else. Maybe he had taken a different exit. Maybe he had simply wandered off to another bar. But as the hours passed, it became clear that something was very wrong. Because Brian Shaffer never contacted his friends. He never returned home. And by the next day, no one knew where he was. Let's pause here for a second to thank another sponsor helping support the Pine Grove Briar. If you spend time outdoors, work with your hands, or just appreciate gear built to last, you should check out Bare Knuckles gloves. These are some of the toughest leather gloves on the market. They're built for durability, comfort, and protection. Whether you're working outdoors, riding motorcycles, handling tools, or just need gloves that won't fall apart after a few uses. Right now you can get 15% off your order by using the promo code PGBPromo. Just go to buybareknuckles.com/discount/PGBPromo. Again, that's Bare Knuckles, and the code is PGBPromo for 15% off. And remember, when you use my code, I do earn a small commission. If you decide to purchase something, you're also supporting the Pine Grove Briar, which helps keep episodes like this coming your way. Alright, let's get back to the mystery. When Brian didn't return home the next morning, people began to worry. His girlfriend Alexis tried calling him. Friends tried reaching him, but Brian's phone went straight to voicemail. Soon his family contacted the law. And investigators quickly realized something chilling. Brian Shaffer seemingly disappeared inside a building covered by security cameras. Detectives immediately began reviewing the surveillance footage from the South Campus Gateway Complex. Camera after camera. Hour after hour of recordings. They watched every person entering and exiting the escalator area. And that's when investigators noticed something that made this case so famous. They could clearly see Brian Shaffer entering the building earlier that night. They could see him talking to the two women outside the bar. They could see him walking back toward the entrance. But after that moment, there was no footage of Brian Shaffer ever leaving the building. None. Everyone else who entered the bar eventually appeared on camera leaving, but Brian never did. Somehow, in a crowded building with dozens of witnesses and multiple security cameras, Brian Shaffer had vanished. As investigators began digging deeper into Brian Shaffer's disappearance, the security footage became the centerpiece of the entire case. Detectives carefully reviewed every available camera angle inside the South Campus Gateway complex. The escalator entrance, where people entered and exited the building, was monitored by cameras, and according to investigators, everyone who entered the area appeared on camera leaving it. Everyone, except Brian Shaffer. At first, police considered the possibility that Brian had simply slipped past the cameras. Maybe he left through a blind spot. Maybe he exited through another door. But the more investigators examined the building layout, the stranger things became. The ugly tuna saloon sat on the second floor of the complex. The main way in and out was the escalator entrance that was under constant video surveillance. There were emergency exits inside the building, but using them would have triggered alarms. And according to the bar's management, no alarms had gone off that night. That meant one of two things had to be true. Either Brian somehow slipped past multiple cameras unnoticed, or something happened to him inside the building. Detectives began interviewing everyone who had been at the bar that night. Employees, security staff, friends, and the two women Brian had spoken with shortly before disappearing. No one reported seeing any kind of altercation, no fight, no fuss, no disturbance. Brian simply seemed to fade into the crowd. Investigators also examined the possibility that Brian had left with someone through a construction area connected to the building. At that time, parts of the South Campus Gateway complex were still under construction. Some theorized that Brian could have slipped through an unfinished section and exited somewhere outside the camera's view. But extensive searches of those areas revealed nothing. No trace of Brian, no evidence of struggle, nothing that explained how a grown man could vanish so completely. Then there was Brian's cell phone. Now, you have to remember, 2006 cell phones weren't what they are today. But in the days following his disappearance, something strange happened. Brian's phone continued to ring. Friends and family tried to call him repeatedly. For weeks, the calls went straight to voicemail. But months later, Brian's phone suddenly rang normally when his girlfriend Alexis tried to call it. It didn't go to voicemail. It rang several times. Then it stopped again. Investigators attempted to track the signal, but his phone never connected long enough to pinpoint a location. It remains one of the eeriest details of the case. Was the phone briefly turned on? Was someone else in possession of it? Or was it simply a technical glitch in the cell network? No one knows. As the investigation continued, another tragedy struck the people closest to Brian. His friend, Clint Florence, who had been with him the night he disappeared, struggled with the intense scrutiny surrounding the case. Clint was one of the last people known to see Brian alive, and police interviewed him extensively. Although investigators eventually cleared him as a suspect, the pressure of the case weighed heavily on him. Years later, Clint died in what was described as an unrelated accident. And for those following the mystery, it was yet another unsettling chapter in an already disturbing story. One more thread in a case filled with unanswered questions. Before we move into the final part of the story, let's take a quick moment to thank another sponsor supporting the Pine Grove Briar. If you're a fan of classic music, sports teams, or iconic pop culture merch, you should check out Old Glory. Old Glory has a massive selection of officially licensed apparel and gear featuring legendary bands, sports franchises, and classic designs. Whether you're looking for vintage-style band shirts, sports fan gear, or unique apparel that stands out, they've got a huge collection to choose from. Right now, you can get 15% off your order by using the promo code PGBPromo. Just go to oldglory.com/discount/PGBPromo. Again, that's Old Glory, and the code is PGBPromo for 15% off. And as always, when you use my code, I do earn a small commission. If you decide to buy something, you're also supporting the Pine Grove Briar, which helps keep the show going. Alright, let's get back to the mystery. Nearly 2 decades later, the disappearance of Brian Shaffer remains unsolved. No body has ever been found, no suspect has ever been charged, and no definitive explanation has ever been proven. Over the years, several theories have emerged. Some believe Brian may have left the bar unnoticed and met with foul play somewhere nearby. Others think he may have intentionally disappeared to start a new life. But investigators have found no evidence supporting that idea. Brian left behind his car, his belongings, his family, his future career. Nothing about his life suggested someone planning to vanish voluntarily. Another theory suggested something tragic may have happened inside the building itself. An accident, a hidden crime, something that went unnoticed in the chaos of a crowded building. But without physical evidence, that theory remains just speculation. And so the mystery endures. A young man walks into a bar. Security cameras record his arrival. Friends see him laughing and talking just minutes before closing time. And then he's gone. Brian Shaffer will be 46 years old today. His family continues to search for answers, and investigators still accept tips in the case, because somewhere out there, someone knows what really happened that night in Columbus. Someone may hold the missing piece of the puzzle. Until that day comes, the disappearance of Brian Shaffer remains one of the most baffling mysteries in modern case that continues to haunt investigators, internet sleuths, and anyone who has ever watched that surveillance footage and wondered, how does someone walk into a building and never come back out? This has been the Pine Grove Briar. Until next time, keep your pipe lit and your powder dry.